Hey everyone, it's People of Substance. I am so excited to introduce Alicia Barron. So before I let you introduce yourself, I just want to talk about how long we've known each other. So we went to undergrad together at a
Mhm.
school called Gustavus Adolphus College, which most of you have never heard of. It's Swedish
Nope.
in Minnesota. Yes. But we didn't know each other. We probably did, but at one of the parties or things like that. So we didn't really know each other. And I really got to know her in the past few years in nonprofit space. So I'm thrilled to have you. Hi, Alicia.
Hi. Yeah, I think we figured out that we had multiple classes together, I think probably, and we know some of the same people. And when we encountered each other again, I was like, "You look really familiar." And of course, your name is very familiar because I think I can safely say that you were the only Olga at Gustavus, perhaps in its history. I don't know. But so I
We
definitely
have
was like,
plenty.
you think there's plenty?
There's plenty of Thors and plenty of like
Yeah.
Igmars or whatever, right?
Yes, yeah, for sure. There probably was one other Olga for sure, but at the time you were the only one there. So I was like, your name is definitely familiar. So it was funny though, because we were like, well, when were you there? When were you there? And realized that we actually were there at the exact same time. So, and I am actually very sad we didn't know each other better while we were there, because now getting to know you, I'm like, man, what a missed opportunity to have had somebody really fun to hang out with.
Although, probably we'd get up to no good together. I feel
I
like
mean, look at our sweet innocent faces. There's never any trouble that came from us,
never,
right?
never. So we actually first, I think I saw you on one of the alumni events,
Mhm.
and it was related to nonprofits. And it was great to see somebody who is from my grade, from my undergrad, in the same space. And like you said, we have friends in common. But how did you end up in nonprofit space? I think you said psych, or you had a major that was not nonprofit related. So how
Yeah.
did you land where you are?
Yeah, my undergraduate degree is in psychology, and as anybody who's ever gotten a bachelor's in psychology understands, you basically can't do anything, but you can do everything. So it kind of leaves you with your doors very, very open, but usually the need to go to grad school, frankly. And so my dad had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis when I was a teenager, and so I had already gotten involved with the National MS Society at that point through college, and volunteering for walks and a couple of other things that throughout college. And so that really prompted me to want to get involved with that type of space, get involved with people who were living with chronic illnesses. And so after I ended up leaving Gustavus with, graduating from Gustavus, I started working in a couple different kind of unique nonprofit spaces, working with people with psychological issues, so mental health diagnoses, but also developmental disabilities. And so worked with those folks in a home environment, which I had to have a second job because it paid me so little, which was a whole different story for another day. And then moved into working with them in sort of an employment-based system, so in a sheltered workshop situation. So really kind of a funky little curve. And the whole time I was doing that, I was trying to figure out what I really wanted to be when I grew up, and understanding I probably needed to go to graduate school. And so after working for these different kind of jobs before, I ended up getting involved with some of the bigger nonprofit organizations. So, Epilepsy Foundation and things like that, some of the big foundations. And then I ended up going to grad school and getting my master's degree in social work and staying in the same field. So I'm not sure I actually needed it now that I think about it. But yes, I've always been kind of on the programmatic side of the nonprofit world. So education, advocacy, camps, things like that. So, but it really was prompted because my dad had a chronic illness, and, I wanted to help families like mine and, help people better cope with this type of diagnosis, because chronic illnesses are definitely a family issue. Even if we're not the ones living with the disease, it's definitely ripples that affect your entire family. And so I thought, this is a way that I can give back to this community that has been helpful to my family, but also hopefully make it so that nobody else has to deal with it in the future. I joke on a regular basis that I want to work myself out of a job. And that's my main goal, I think, in life, is to hopefully get to an organization where I'm like, and now I can drop the mic and leave and not have to worry about this anymore.
So with the MS, so I was actually going to ask you about the National MS Society. You've been involved for quite a long time.
Yes. Yeah. I started doing the MS Walk when I was 19. We were freshmen at Gustavus at that point. And it was in Mankato, and it was super long. I've told people this, like, it was like a 13-mile walk or something. I mean, it was like a very long event, and they were like, well, was it this type of walk? And I was like, I don't know, but it was, I promise it was an MS Society sanctioned walk, and started that in 1997 and have been doing various fundraisers for the MS Society since then, but primarily walks. So I have, at some point, I think I realized, I had reached, I don't know, 20 years or something, which that's crazy to think about, of doing walks. But as you can imagine, walks, walking 3 miles on a flat surface is a little bit less challenging than it could be. And so I started trying out a couple of different events. So I did their challenge walk one year and very quickly realized that while everybody walks on a daily basis, when you walk 20 kilometers over the course of multiple days, you really should train. So I figured out the hard way that was perhaps, I was a little blasé about my experience there, and I hurt myself very greatly by the end of walking that many kilometers. So I haven't done that one again, but a couple of years ago, they started doing hike MS, which is where you, exactly what it sounds like, you hike instead of walk. And since that's in one of my favorite cities to go and visit, we have been doing that for the last couple of years. And so it's been really fun to do something a little more challenging and, but still fundraise. And so I've been doing that for a long time.
Did you ever add up how much money you raised for them in
Oh
all
gosh,
your?
no.
We should do that.
No, I should do that. Yeah, I should. I mean, this last year was my highest year yet, and I was at, I think I raised $6,200. So, and that was my highest one. I think the first year I raised like $200. So I feel like I'm feeling pretty good about my ability to, but also I know a lot more people that have jobs, that I think that helps.
Which is also a tale and a lesson to people to engage those 19-year-olds. Even in a small way, they may only raise a couple $100 for you, but over their lifetime of involvement, that could really turn into something. So
absolutely.
I love that. Yeah. So I want to ask you, so right now you're Director of Patient Empowerment, which I think it's like my favorite title I've heard from anybody, at the Infusion Access Foundation. Can you talk a little bit about what it is?
Sure. Yeah, the Infusion Access Foundation is actually a pretty new nonprofit organization, which has it's really exciting in a lot of ways. As I mentioned, I've been part of kind of these bigger disease nonprofits for my entire career, basically. And the fantastic part about that is you have a great infrastructure around you. And so you end up being like a really good person at this thing, and you sort of are always in this thing and you always do that. So a lot of times they're broken up into like programs, advocacy, fundraising, and then sort of advancement sort of activities. So the people that are working with big donors, people that do fundraising events, people that try to influence legislation, and the people that do the education and help centers and blah, blah, blah. So I've always kind of been in that little pocket, but I move over into advocacy pretty regularly because my master's degree is in political social work. So I specifically wanted to work in advocacy, but a little bit, not all, a little bit, because frankly, a lot of advocacy is a lot of heartbreak, I feel like. So I don't know if I want to do it all the time. But having always been kind of in this space, I felt a little stymied, and especially since I do fundraising kind of on the side as, personally. The great thing about the Infusion Access Foundation is because we're such a small team, you're really able to work on everything. There isn't anybody's job. It's all of our jobs. This is just the work we do. And so we're able to really be creative and do things in a slightly different way. But that doesn't tell you what we do. So the Infusion Access Foundation is a nonprofit organization dedicated to trying to ensure that patients have access to provider-administered medications. So that's things like infusions, essentially, or injections that have to be done in an office setting. So we are looking to see how we might want to expand our reach a little bit beyond those two things, but that's still something we're figuring out. We do that through in a couple of different ways. And so mainly it is through advocacy activity. So trying to influence either state or federal legislation and or payer advocacy. So your insurance companies, essentially. So trying to influence these two spaces to try to make some more patient-friendly policies. Things like getting rid of step therapy or getting rid of non-medical switching, things like that. So we work on these types of issues, but we also work again with payers to try to influence them. So for instance, there was an insurance company that shall remain nameless in a state that also shall remain nameless that has a very specific policy about one medication that shouldn't, basically people should have access to it much faster, and they have a step policy where you have to try this one and this one before you can get there. And so we heard from some patients and some providers in that area that they really wanted us to try to help write a letter to this company to get them to try to change their policies. And so we did that to try to influence this so that patients would have faster access to that medication. We also do some education activities, as you can imagine, and so we do some webinars, videos, fact sheets, things like that, all about kind of some more basic things. So some of them are disease specific. So like gout resources for infusions, but most of it tends to be like how to prepare for an infusion, or, how to do this thing with your insurance. Or we have a whole video that just came out about pharmacy benefit managers, which is those funky middlemen in between your insurance company and your, pharmacy. They're the people in the middle that try to, kind of negotiate prices and figure out the medications that are going to be covered by your insurance, things like that. And so, what are those, and how do you try to influence legislation to regulate them, but also what can you do as a patient to try to, ensure that you're working within the system, but getting what you need. And so a lot of it has to do with insurance, to be honest, which is daunting in some ways and new as well. I mean, I've definitely had, of course, worked with patients that, of course, all of us have insurance for the most part, and but never had to work this closely. And so it's definitely a little bit of a stretch for me, which is fun. And also just incredibly needed. I think if you've worked within the chronic disease community, you are a person living in the world with insurance, you've been frustrated by them in some sense. And so it's fun to be able to work in a space where I do feel like we're making a difference for people. And so that's kind of where we're at. We also do a lot of patient stories, which is my favorite part, is we bring people in and we have them tell their stories and talk about how access to medications, and especially these types of medications, which tend to be more expensive and harder to get to, has really changed the course of their disease or changed their life for a positive way. Not that we're saying everybody needs to be on medication. That's not it. But if you and your doctor have decided that this is what you need, then you should have access to it. And this is a way that you can see how it changes somebody's life to have the right treatment at the right time.
Well, and time is of the essence, and also just all the complexities with insurance. Sometimes it's so frustrating. Like you said, it's daunting. So it's just making sure that you're receiving the benefits.
Yeah, when you pay for them, you should get them.
So I saved, the question I've been waiting to ask you. So prior to this job, you were at Crohn's and colitis. And, so I want to talk about the podcast that you started while you were there, and you've carried forward. I think you're about 15, 20 episodes in, at least.
I just posted episode 39, but that won't come up for a couple of weeks. So I think we're at 37 when we're recording this.
And the name of the podcast is Bowel Movements. So we're going to talk about
Bowel Moments.
Sorry. I can't read my own writing here. Bowel Moments. So it's about poop.
It is. Yeah. Yes. I never assumed I would ever have a podcast about poop, basically, or a disease that very much involves poop. But especially since I'm like the person that you would never assume would ever talk about this, because nobody knows that I poop. My husband still, despite almost 20 years of marriage, doesn't know that I do this. So I'm a little surprised myself. But yeah, I was working for the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation and had been there, I think at this point, probably 5 years. And, it's such a great community. The providers in this space are just really wonderful, giving people. Patients are really fun. They're really, really fantastic people. And, a great advocacy community. It's a lot of people who don't take themselves very seriously, which I very much appreciate. And so a friend of mine and I were sort of, sitting down. I think we don't live in the same place. So I think we were on the phone chatting about something else. And she was also at the time working for the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation, and she herself has Crohn's disease. And so we were sort of talking about podcasts and about how, like, they were really popular. And, I think at that, we're kind of at the height of podcasts, and we're like, oh my gosh, wouldn't it be fun to do a podcast? And then it became, wouldn't it be, should it be this, should it be that? And what we came up with was kind of serious. And then it was basically started as a joke where I said, wouldn't it be funny to insert very, very well-known IBD doctor's name to, a little bit drunk and get him to talk about Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. And we laughed and decided that actually that's probably the better model for us. So our tagline is real talk about the realities of IBD served on the rocks. And so we get people to come in, either patients living with Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, to come in and talk to us about their story and share a drink with us. Sometimes it hasn't been alcohol lately, so it's made us feel a little guilty. Or healthcare providers that care for the people that live with these diseases to come in and talk to us. And so it's really kind of a free for all. The 3 questions we always ask is, what's your connection to this community? What are you drinking? That's the first question.
Yeah.
And then the last one is, what piece of advice would you have for the community? And then everything else in between is really just based on what people say. So we have a lot of times a little bit of an idea of some things that they might want to talk about. And so we try to, of course, stay there. But if you've said something interesting somewhere in your, disease story, I'm going to ask you about it, and so we can take some turns that maybe you didn't anticipate. So, it's been a lot of fun to do. It's been a lot of fun to kind of make sure I'm staying connected to this community. And we've brought in some really fantastic guests. I've learned so much. Like, we have had 2 pelvic floor physical therapists on, which again was not something I had any familiarity with. And I realize now, like, it's remarkable how much this can change somebody's life. And it's not something that's talked about a lot. And so really, really fascinating. We had a researcher come on talking about trauma-informed therapy and working with people with medical trauma. And again, coming from the psychological side of the world, I'm like, this is super fascinating. And so we've had some really, really interesting conversations, and just some like patient stories that were like funny and touching and, heartfelt. Like, we were talking earlier about, running and how that can sometimes speed things up for folks, even without IBD, and about how we've had some people have some, they were laughing, so I can laugh too, stories about training for half marathons and having some times where their disease and also the combination of the disease and the running have combined in some very interesting and funny ways. And so we've had some crazy conversations, basically. But yeah, it's a lot of fun.
What kind of feedback are you getting from listeners? I'm sure people feel so seen and connected.
Yeah, I was I was joking with a guest the other day, because it's funny, because our guests are now coming to us because they're hearing our podcast. So they're people we don't know. It started out with us talking to people we know. I mean, we were talking to our friends, kind of thing. And so we're starting to get guests that are people we don't know. And we just had a guest on, and he gave us such super positive feedback. And I was like, that's really nice to hear, because we don't hear a lot of feedback. Oddly enough, we have one of our, I refer to her as our super fan, who's also a friend of ours, that will tell us every episode. She'll be like, this was great. I liked this. I like that. So we get some feedback from her, but otherwise people are a little bit quiet. But when we actually get a chance to talk to people and they're like, oh, that's your podcast. It's, people really like to hear other people's stories. They want to feel connected to other people. And I think even if your disease is not progressed or you haven't struggled as much as the next person, you can relate to aspects of it, and we have to tell both stories. Like, we have to tell stories of people that have really struggled. We need to tell stories of people who are not struggling as much, because, the diseases run the gamut. And so, there's been really good feedback. Just, the one thing is, they say it's a little long, which it is. We intended to make it only 30 minutes, but once you get people talking, it's so hard not to keep talking to them. It's so hard. And of course, I never want to interrupt anybody's story. And so they've gotten a little longer than we anticipated, but it's hopefully people will listen to it in chunks if they don't have time for it, but also will feel like they're learning something from it, or at least feeling connected to somebody. Because that's the idea of it, is really just to help people feel like they're not alone in this journey, which we hate the word journey. So I'm sorry I said it.
I love that. No, I love that. And I can only imagine, preparation for an episode, like as you're brainstorming questions, or, I can only imagine kind of the cackling and the laughs you have along the way.
Oh, there's definitely lots of stuff that gets cut because it gets wildly inappropriate at times. As you can imagine, having a drink with somebody and like joking about pooping. Sometimes maybe we there's some things that I cut out. One of the latest episodes, I did keep in more of kind of the stuff that I would have cut out. And so I just to give people kind of a look in behind the curtain.
You're giving me some ideas for the future of People of Substance. So maybe, introducing cocktail hour here. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think you should.
So speaking of appropriate, so I'm going to remind you that we're not in our undergrad days, because that game can get wildly inappropriate, but we're going to play a round of 2 truth and a lie.
Okay.
So you know how that works, right? Like, you tell me 3 things. 2 of them are truthful, 1 is a lie, and I have to pick out which one I think is a lie.
Okay.
So, but we'll
I
keep
had
it
to
like
write it down because I saw that
maybe.
and it got like really stressed out. For some reason, the like easiest things stress me out because I'm like, I don't know. This has to be like interesting, but also I don't lie well. Like, okay. Are you ready?
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay. First one is because you knew me when we were younger. You did not know this about me, but I was a backup singer for a very brief amount of time for a Minnesota-based band called Bone Club. So that was kind of that early 2000s era. I am a dual citizen with Canada and the United States, and I got that after we graduated from college because I was going to go live in Toronto. Didn't happen, but I got it. And I have visited 5 of the 7 continents, which is still not as many as I would like. And frankly, I'm missing South America of all places. So, yeah.
So we'll talk about South America.
Okay.
These are tricky because I can definitely see you as a backup singer.
Yeah, I'd love that. Yeah.
I'm going to say the Canada piece is a lie.
No.
No? Which one is a lie?
I was never a backup singer.
Really?
No, I have sung, yes, and I did voice lessons and things through college, but no, I was never a backup singer. I have always wanted to be, but Pink Floyd would have been the band I wanted to be a backup singer for. And lately, Foo Fighters, how fun would that be? But they don't really have backup singers, so I guess maybe I could be their first one.
Yeah, that would work.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's definitely talk about South America because I feel
Yes.
like by default that's direction we go, and it's time zone differences, so that helps a lot. So cool.
Yeah.
Well, Alicia, thank you so much for coming on. It's a pleasure to have you. I love what you're doing, and I love your sense of humor. And I'm just so thrilled to have you. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. It was fun to talk to you always, but especially in this case.